Once born through the imagination of science fiction writers, space warfare now poses the greatest technological threat to life as we know it. In the 21st century, almost every aspect of our lives hinges on the use of satellites orbiting our planet. Everything we do is tied to space. Satellites underpin the entire digital economy, allowing billions of dollars of commerce to be sent throughout the world, enabling weather forecasting and climate change tracking of wildfires to the receding ice caps, as well as making agricultural and industrial processes more efficient and on time. Not only do they make the world go round, they also make it more safe, providing military personnel with secure and immediate communications in times of national and international threat. Since the dawn of the satellite era, space has been cluttered with more and more technology for societal and warfare advancements. With threats from unidentified aerial objects and identified states ever increasing, comes a new age of defense, protecting assets and asserting dominance in the final frontier.
The Space Force, the first new branch of the United States military since the Air Force was created almost 75 years ago.
Come with us as we dissect humanity's voyage into outer space and preparation for the dawn of galactic warfare.
What do you think are the chances of a third world war?
Well, I think that provided the nations of the free world don't throw away everything we've done in the last 10 years in building up a tremendous deterrent to aggression, provided that is understood and done, then I think the chances of a third world war in any future we can foresee are very small.
Are these Russian Sputniks a threat to world peace?
No. I think that people have become rather, I think the word would be emotionally disturbed by the satellite, which had to come scientifically, which I said so 2 years ago. It has a military significance, of course, because it will enable you to photograph your enemy's country. Eventually the satellite will be controlled, and you will have eventually television equipment inside it. All those sort of things will come. But I don't see why it should be a threat to peace. I think it's just a scientific advance. I think the deterrent to aggression on the part of any ruler today is very great.
Oh yes, I think it's easy to explain. I think there are two basic factors in the change of Russian attitude towards the West. One is the nuclear bomb. They know if that ever goes off, it will destroy Russia completely. And the other is the physical presence of China on a very undefended and a very long frontier. Not an immediate menace, but certainly a menace when they get the nuclear weapon.
The department's principal priorities are long-term strategic competitions with China and Russia. Given the magnitude of the threats they pose to U.S. security and prosperity today, Congress must commit to both an increased and sustained investment in our capabilities.
China and Russia continue to invest across the full range of nuclear, cyber, space, and conventional capabilities. Both states are focused on limiting our ability to project power and undermining the credibility of our alliances.
Space is one of our vital national interests in the sense of our use of space, our operations in space, and it is becoming a contested warfighting domain, and we have got to adapt to that reality.
As their actions make clear, our adversaries have transformed space into a warfighting domain already. and the United States will not shrink from this challenge.
Big, isn't it? Big and challenging and threatening. Within the last few years, this space environment has become tenanted with scores of orbiting satellites, penetrated by hundreds of space probes, crossed by thousands of missiles. The shape of things to come will bring new challenges. The exploration of space and the peaceful uses of its environment, and new threats. The dangers of national annihilation or blackmail by space weaponry. To face the challenge, to guard against the threat, we must be able to detect, identify, and track many space objects, instantly and concurrently.
To understand the battle for dominance in the final frontier, we must look back through history to the precursor of the ICBM, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. Out of the horrors of war came a technological advancement that would change the course of human history forever. This is the inception of space travel, and it begins in Nazi Germany.
The terror weapon, known as the V-2, was to run the gamut of many dangerous failures before its ultimate successful launching. But from these failures, Germany was to fashion the grandfather of the space vehicles to come. Some of the misfires, as illustrated in this captured German film, made sensational viewing. But finally, failure turned into success, and Adolf Hitler had a new and horrible weapon with which to terrorize the British Empire.
The race to survive meant consistently improving technology. This was the genesis of the rocket missile. Rockets were initially developed for the purpose of long-range destruction. Regardless of their intent, this changing technology captivated new interest in engineering and military might. They would attempt to send the rocket much farther than an attack on neighboring countries. However, the advanced technology also provided humanity with potential access to go even further into the cosmos.
General Bernie Schriever, Air Force retired, missile builder, former commander, Air Research and Development Command.
There was no question that the ICBM would be coming along once you had the V-2. As a matter of fact, the Germans had on the drawing boards an intercontinental ballistic missile. I can recall a speech I made in San Diego, California early in 1957, in which I stated that we had the wherewithal to go into space in a real way. It was strange that I received a wire the next day from the Pentagon which said, don't use the word space in any of your speeches in the future. The Air Force has been on the leading edge of technology, and it's played a very important, innovative role in this country. Space, of course, was a major spin-off. The ICBM program provided the platform to get into space. And we're still using a lot of ICBM systems in our space work.
From the beginnings of the V-2 missile in 1942 came the understanding that this rocket had the potential technology to reach heights never before imaginable. After the Soviets gained possession of the V-2 manufacturing facilities, production of these rockets began. On the 4th of October 1957, Sputnik 1 became the first artificial satellite to be launched into space. This was the next step in the evolution of mankind and signaled the start of the space race. The launch of Sputnik 1 sparked fear amongst American establishment that the Soviet Union now had the capability to reach their soil with missile bombardments.
So what do you see as the West's next step?
Well, we've gone over a number of steps, as you know, and in New York this time we were able to arrange, at least I'm confident we shall be able to arrange, an agreement to prevent weapons getting into outer space rather remote perhaps from the ordinary person, but not at all remote if you think of putting weapons there, because you can pinpoint targets on the Earth from satellites, just as you can photograph, and no doubt that you could shoot. And so that is really rather a big move. I'd hoped that the next agreement would be to concentrate on getting observers over the whole of the NATO and Warsaw Pact area, but the Russians have taken that back to look at it. It's now going to be considered in Geneva when the disarmament conference reassembles. I would hope still that that would be the next step, although there are great difficulties apparently from the Russians' point of view.
As tensions increased, the Soviet Union began to exhibit their power with the launch of Sputnik 2. America had to catch up.
Well, to my way of thinking, the existence of these two satellites and their orbits constitutes for us in this country possibly the gravest military threat that we have ever had to face. I say that because it is possible that the threat is not only of a different order of magnitude to any that we have had to face before, but it is of entirely different character. In the past, threats to this country have been threats of invasion, surface invasion, as you might say, by sea, by land, by what they call conventional means. They have been threats that it was possible to envisage in ordinary everyday terms and against which one could prepare to defend oneself. The threat posed now by these satellites is not of just invasion and traditional battle fighting. It is a threat of total and absolute annihilation of this country and everything in it. Now, as I say, the threat may be of that magnitude now. Everything depends, at the moment, in my view, on the fate of that wretched dog. If it is possible for the Russians to bring that dog, either alive or in recognizable form, back to the surface of the Earth at some predetermined point, then indeed our danger is acute. Because it means that instead of a dog, it may be possible to deliver a bomb, a megaton hydrogen bomb at a predetermined point on the surface of this globe. And if that predetermined point happens to be in this country, as I say, we face the threat of total annihilation. In general terms, therefore, we have every right to be extremely apprehensive about future developments, and in my view, there has been a total and absolute revolution in the balance of military power.
On the 31st of January, 1958, the USA finally broke into the new frontier and launched satellite Explorer 1 into orbit.
As part of the U.S. International Geophysical and Air Program, a scientific Earth satellite was placed in orbit at 5 seconds after 10:55 p.m. by means of a Jupiter-C rocket vehicle launched by the Army at Cape Canaveral, Florida.
From the success of the two satellite launches, President John F. Kennedy expressed keen interest in the space race and began to expand the minds of most Americans past the limitations of Earth and entertained the opportunities of advancement space can offer.
Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for a great new American enterprise. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth.
Though his speech inspired the nation about the prospect of a new world beyond the Earth's atmosphere, it didn't speed up scientific development, as once again the American space team were overshadowed when the Soviet Union sent the first man into space.
Everything was in readiness at the launching site. The epoch-making hour had arrived.
Yuri Gagarin on 12th April 1961.
Gagarin and Titov were on their way together to the cosmodrome. Should the need arise, the backup man would replace his friend. Gagarin was full of energy, in good humor, and in good spirits. The first strides into the unknown were about to be made. And then what? Then man would conquer solar space and acquire might and boundless power over nature.
Gagarin completed an orbit of the Earth in 89 minutes, which transformed him into an instant worldwide celebrity and a national hero. He was awarded the Order of Lenin and given the official title of the Hero of the Soviet Union.
The Red Square. The man who has been in outer space has now returned to the heart of the Soviet Union.
The successful orbit was another blow to the United States, as it had already scheduled its first flight into space in May of the same year. Immediate research and development began regarding space survival and preparations for astronauts to be able to withstand the environment that is outside the Earth's atmosphere. The excitement of potential space travel for humans increased advancements in astronaut training, focusing on how the body would cope with the changing pressures and zero gravity. On the 5th of May, 1961, the U.S. finally entered the space race with their launch of Freedom 7 with Alan B. Shepard on board, making him the first American to go into space. The entire flight's information was recorded from launch to recovery to be made available to anyone who was interested about learning of the achievements from that day.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to express on behalf of us all the great pleasure we have in welcoming Commander Shepard and Mrs. Shepard here today. And I think it does credit to him that he is associated with such a distinguished group of Americans whom we are all glad to honor today, his companions in the flight to outer space.
February 1962. John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. He spent 4 hours and 56 minutes in flight and managed 7 rotations of the Earth's orbit. He was commended by the President for this historic flight, which led him to become a national hero, the embodiment of the American dream.
Milestones in human progress that mark recorded history. In my judgment, this nation's orbital pioneering in space is of such historic stature, representing as it does a vast advancement that will profoundly influence the progress of all mankind. It signals also a call for alertness to our national opportunities and responsibilities. It requires physical and moral stamina to equal the stresses of these times and a willingness to meet the dangers and the challenges of the future.
The battle of technological achievements between the Soviet Union and the U.S. only increased tension.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
After a couple of quiet years, NASA had developed a mission to circle the moon, Apollo 8. This was the first mission of the Apollo program, determined to bring humans to the moon. It was a 6-day mission that lifted off on 21st December 1968 with a crew of 3 men. Throughout their 20-hour period in orbit, the crew conducted a full sleepless schedule of tasks which included landmarking and landing site tracking and different methods of photography. The mission was triumphant, with bringing humans to the moon, but left scientists with the major task of trying to figure out how to safely begin to land on the lunar surface and allow humans to walk on the moon.
Apollo Saturn launch control, T-minus 3 hours, 4 minutes, 32 seconds, and counting. Right on time as far as the astronaut countdown is concerned. The prime crew now departing from their crew quarters.
On the 20th July 1969, history was made in space. America took the upper hand. Mission Apollo 11 was launched and had intentions of allowing man to walk on the moon. The whole experience was broadcast to America as they shared the experience with the astronauts.
60 seconds. Lights on. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow.
Stand
4
back,
forward. 30. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little.
30. 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Forward, just. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Buzz is erecting the solar wind experiment now.
They placed a flag of the United States in view of the camera so the nation could witness. They then spoke with the then President Richard Nixon through a telephone radio transmission, which Nixon called the most historic phone call ever made from the White House. All of which would be impossible without the nexus of artificial satellites that encircle our globe.
For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure they too join with Americans in recognizing what an immense feat this is. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. And as you talk to us from the Sea of Tranquility, it inspires us to redouble our efforts to bring peace and tranquility to Earth. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one. One in their pride in what you have done.
Tension between the adversaries grew with every human accomplishment achieved. The space race will always be a monumental time in history. From the initial achievement of breaking Earth's gravity to a crew of humans living in space for 2 months, nobody could predict the rapid developments of space travel, the landmarks it would accomplish, and innovations it would birth. Those rapid developments included the launching of satellites for a multitude of purposes. Every year since 1957, a country has attempted to put a satellite into orbit.
At Cape Canaveral, Florida, the Army's Jupiter C rocket is readied for America's second attempt to launch a space satellite. No relation to the IRBM Jupiter, this is a rebuilt Redstone, a 200-mile missile carrying, instead of a warhead, 3 stages of solid fuel booster rockets and the Explorer, a 6-foot bullet only inches across, crammed with electronic gear. 30 pounds of payload. Stands poised on its launching pad. The hours-long countdown approaches 0. A moment of enormous tension, for every missile launching is still an experiment. Any one of tens of thousands of things can go wrong, with catastrophic results. But all that can be done to assure perfection has been done. The moment is at hand. The countdown reaches 0. These are the dry facts that will help carry a man ever farther.
As human presence increased in space over decades, so have the threats to the progress we have achieved. The technological assets put into space that amounts to an incalculable sum of money and underpins the way we live our lives today is in need of defending. Preparation for warfare in space dates back to the inception of space travel, as the United States looked to nullify the Russian probe Sputnik. 1959 saw the first anti-satellite weapon test, as America showed off its early capabilities by firing a missile at its own defunct satellite, triggering the beginning of space warfare. October 1963. The United Nations unanimously backs the need to prohibit weapons of mass destruction in outer space. 3 years of proposals later, the Outer Space Treaty is born, effectively ending the threat of space being used as an offensive military position. Throughout history, many treaties are signed with the aim of peace. Some fail, leaving many to pose the question, if treaties on Earth fail to work in a lot of instances, why would it work in space? Though the treaty ended the use of nuclear weapons sent from space, limited the use of astronomical bodies for peaceful purposes, and forbids bases and weapons testing on celestial bodies such as the Moon, it does not ban superpowers from having a military presence in space, allowing the establishment of military space forces and the arming of conventional weapons in the ether.
We'll have to take out the geosynchronous satellites, which are command-control communications. Would certainly be a very valuable or very high-priority target.
Do you think the Soviet Union is more advanced in space weaponry?
Yes, I think so. I can't get into our intelligence estimates for classification on that, but I feel they're ahead of us in laser technology for a space-based system. Those satellites that are providing information to the commanders on the ground that are destroying our resources, certainly if we could take out that capability from the Soviet commanders, we would do that.
Fast forward to 2018.
Space is a warfighting domain, just like the land, air, and sea. We may even have a Space Force, develop another one. Space Force. We have the Air Force, we have the Space Force. We have the Army, the Navy. You know, I was saying it the other day because we're doing a tremendous amount of work in space. I said, maybe we need a new force. We'll go with the Space Force. And I was not really serious. And then I said, what a great idea. Maybe we'll have to do that.
Though widely seen as a vanity project for President Trump, the debate surrounding the creation of a Space Force is nothing new. Protecting and monitoring of activity in our orbit has always been a defense issue, and at the forefront of military minds for the last few decades. From 1947, space defense has been under the jurisdiction of the Air Force until 1982, when a subdivision of the Air Force was created, called the Air Force Space Command. The appreciation of its power was felt in its first major employment during the Gulf War, often referred to as the First Space War. Capabilities to pinpoint military and ballistic targets, as well as protecting vital communications from satellites, gave the American-led coalition the upper hand on all fronts. The increased presence and potentiality of war from American adversaries reignited the debate for the creation of a sixth branch of the greatest military body in the world, a space force. As our lives rapidly became intrinsically linked with the technology in our upper atmosphere, Congress questioned whether the Air Force could handle the latest challenges. January 2001. A space commission headed by Donald Rumsfeld put forward the need for an overhaul of national space policy, wanting to give the president power to deploy weapons in need of a deterrence or to protect U.S. interests. In response, China started its own space defense program and pursued anti-satellite defense systems. Events later that year put efforts to evolve the Air Force's Space Command on the back burner. The following year, the U.S. Space Command is inactivated, spurring China and Russia to pursue further dominance in the final frontier, developing an array of counter-space weaponry. United States adversaries saw their opportunity.
How can we believe that the Russian Federation is serious about preventing an arms race in outer space when they are the ones that are developing ground-launched anti-satellite weapons that would not be prohibited by their own draft treaty? Russia is not a responsible actor who intends to uphold its obligations under arms control and disarmament agreements. And when China has deployed an operational ground-based anti-satellite missile intended to target low Earth orbit satellites, with likely research on anti-satellite capabilities designed to threaten all orbits.
January 11, 2007. In an act of flexing their own superiority, China conducts an anti-satellite missile test on their own weather satellite, the first seen since 1985. The impact from the kinetic kill vehicle traveling at 18,000 miles per hour created over 2,000 pieces of trackable space debris. The debris, along with more than 27,000 other pieces that orbits us today, poses a serious threat to the International Space Station, future space flight, and robotic missions into space, and has to be routinely tracked by military radars. The successful destruction sent a warning to the U.S. establishment. China's dominance in the final frontier expanded with the creation and modification of their answer to America's global positioning system, the Beidou Satellite Positioning System. By 2020, the constellation of satellites had overtaken its U.S. rival in size, a shift with potentially huge implications for both high-tech industry and national security. The U.S. had long been the world leader in satellite-based positioning. Change was necessary.
Nickel 61 Tango Smile J, over.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
Throughout that time, threats from an unknown source began to highlight a lack of control the U.S. had over its airspace.
Is it our own technology? Is it the Chinese? Is it the Russians? Because at the end of the day, come what may, they've got to look at this in an objective manner.
Someone in the military is sick and tired of the lies and the disinformation that they keep bringing forward and, you know, fobbing off to the general public. Someone wanted this out. And I'm glad that they did, because they were the only ones that could do this. If it was like the likes of me or, you know, someone else coming forward with, oh, look at this film footage of this UFO, they wouldn't buy it, they wouldn't have it. It had to come from an official source.
There was no visual wings or aerofoils, you know, that you would expect to see on an aircraft.
They said, well, it could be the Russians or China. We don't think it is, but it might be. So is that, you know, sort of backdoor way of saying we need more money for the defence budget, just in case these things are, you know, our foreign adversaries?
Have they devised some fantastic craft that can exceed, you know, the capabilities of modern aircraft? And if so, we have to be very concerned with that. So obviously we have to look over the fence to the possibilities that it's another country. That said, I still believe we're dealing with something extraterrestrial or interdimensional.
Whether it is from paranormal or normal origin, the official military videos of unidentified aerial phenomena captured and released by the United States Navy shows that someone, terrestrial or extraterrestrial, is testing the United States' capabilities of defense. One earthly possibility for the source of these phenomenon lies within the advancement of laser technology. Though some of the videos were shot before its disclosure, in 2017, Russia announced it had achieved next-generation laser technology. It is not beyond the realms of imagination that Russia had been testing its capacity, projecting images to test its foe. High-powered lasers remain one of the biggest threats. With capabilities to recharge unchallenged in space, laser weaponry has the potential to pick off satellites one by one in lower Earth's orbit, creating havoc on its societies below.
Our nation of pioneers still yearns to conquer the unknown. Because we are Americans and the future belongs totally to us. Once more, we will launch intrepid souls blazing through the sky and soaring into the heavens. Once more, we will summon the American spirit to tame the next great American frontier. And once more, we will proudly lead humanity. And that's what it is. It's humanity beyond the earth and into those forbidden skies, but they will not be forbidden for long. Very importantly, I'm hereby directing the Department of Defense and Pentagon to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the 6th branch of the armed forces. That's a big statement. We are going to have the Air Force and we are going to have the Space Force, separate but equal.
Our adversaries have transformed space into a warfighting domain already, and the United States will not shrink from this challenge. Under President Trump's leadership, we will meet it head-on to defend our nation and build a peaceful future here on Earth and in space. America will always seek peace in space as on the Earth, but history proves that peace only comes through strength. And in the realm of outer space, the United States Space Force will be that strength in the years ahead. And over the past 18 months, President Trump and our entire administration have taken decisive action to strengthen American power in space as well. President Trump recently signed the largest investment in our national defense since the days of Ronald Reagan. Now the time has come to write the next great chapter in the history of our armed forces, to prepare for the next battlefield, where America's best and bravest will be called to deter and defeat a new generation of threats to our people, to our nation. The time has come to establish the United States Space Force. Now, to be clear, the Space Force will not be built from scratch, because the men and women who run and protect our nation's space programs today are already the best in the world. And since the dawn of the space age, America has remained the best in space. As President Trump has said, in his words, it is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space, and so we will.
Senator Barbara Mikulski fought valiantly to make sure that NASA and the International Space Station did not have Chinese involvement. But more recently, the Chinese are pushing harder and harder. They've even got a movie called The Martian, where they show how the Chinese space program rescues the Americans. They're pushing very hard to acquire some of our most sensitive space technology and to get Americans to come and invest in these companies in China and to bring the high technology with them. So the concrete examples you're asking for, Mr. Chairman, I would say there are more than 100.
We know we must deal with these challenges across all domains, not just the usual air, land, and sea, but also especially in cyber, electronic warfare, and space, where our reliance on technology has given us great strengths and great opportunities, but also led to vulnerabilities that adversaries are eager to exploit. Key to our approach is being able to deter our most advanced competitors. We must have and be seen to have the ability to ensure that anyone who starts a conflict with us will regret having done so. In our budget, our capabilities, our readiness, and our actions, we must and will be prepared for a high-end enemy, what we call full spectrum. In this context, Russia and China are our most stressing competitors, as they've both developed and continue to advance military systems that seek to threaten our advantages in specific areas. We see them in Crimea, Syria, and the South China Sea. In some cases, they're developing weapons and ways of war that seek to achieve their objectives rapidly before they think we can respond.
We will now treat space as an independent region overseen by a new unified geographic combatant command. The establishment of the 11th Combatant Command is a landmark moment. This is a landmark day, one that recognizes the centrality of space to America's national security and defense. SpaceCom will soon be followed, very importantly, by the establishment of the United States Space Force as the 6th branch of the United States Armed Forces. We know the best way to prevent conflict is to prepare for victory.
On behalf of the space warfighters, thank you for your leadership.
December 20th, 2019. Joint Base, Andrews, Maryland.
Now it is my honor to introduce to you my husband, President Donald Trump.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Melania. And hello, Joint Base Andrews, special place. At ease. We have good news for you. This is a truly historic day for the American Armed Forces. In just a few minutes, I will proudly sign into law the largest ever investment in the United States military. In fact, I could say the largest ever by far. The law I'm signing today provides $738 billion. That's with a B. $738 billion in defense funding for the 2020. That's an all-time record in the history of our country. That's the highest amount we've ever spent on our military. And that's after $700 billion in my first year and $716 billion last year. And it's all made right here in the USA. Very important.
Having passed the House vote of 377 to 48 and the Senate vote, the National Defense Authorization Act for 2020 takes effect when Trump's pen hits the paper. The act authorizes a top-line defense budget of $738 billion that includes the inception of a sixth branch of the U.S. military, the Space Force. General J. Raymond becomes the first Chief of Space Operations, tasked with protecting the nation on the latest battlefront.
Okay, we'll sign this. This is the thickness. Can you believe that?
The bill sanctions the use of a $15.4 million budget for the first year of Space Force, increasing by $2.6 billion by 2025.
It's now signed.
Most of the 16,000 Air Force personnel under Space Command, the subdivision of the Air Force, will become the first recruits into the new force.
We launched the first new branch of the U.S. Armed Forces in nearly 75 years since the Air Force. We launched the Space Force. Very, very important.
China and Russia have been conducting highly sophisticated on-orbit activities that could enable them to maneuver their satellites into close proximity of ours, posing unprecedented new dangers to our space systems.
January 2020. Two Russian Cosmos satellites converge on a U.S. spy satellite, the KH-11. Through diplomatic channels, American officials successfully persuade Russia to alter their satellite's trajectory. July 2020. In a first, U.S. personnel detect and accuse Russia of a space-based anti-satellite weapons test, when one of the two Russian satellites, Cosmos 2543, fires a projectile into outer space. The alleged act of aggression from its enemy demonstrates the need for its newly devolved military arm. The threat brought into view the ease at which its adversaries could wreak havoc.
We rebuilt our military. This president signed the largest increase in our national defense since the days of Ronald Reagan and created the first new branch of our armed forces in 70 years, the United States Space Force.
We also launched the Space Force, the first new branch of the United States military since the Air Force was created almost 75 years ago.
After years of budget cuts, this president rebuilt our military. We restored the arsenal of democracy, and we're once again giving our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Space Force the resources that they need to defend this nation.
You never heard me say, a lot of you were at various rallies, you never heard me talking about Space Force. That's something we never talked about. I only figured that one out after I became president because I saw what Russia was doing and what China was doing. I said, we have to do the same thing. And if you think that was easy, that was not easy. That was not easy. It was very hard.
The Space Force motto, Sempre Supra, meaning always above, represents the service's role in establishing, maintaining, and preserving U.S. freedom of operations in the ultimate high ground. Pushing back against criticism that the badge is a knockoff Star Trek design, officials declare the Delta Wing signifies the U.S. Space Force's upward trajectory into space, represents the launch vehicles that send satellites into orbit, and evokes change and innovation. Naturally, the newly dedicated military service, tasked with the protection of American interests among the stars, will cooperate with NASA on planetary defense. Not only will they track space junk, they will also map asteroid threats. Few threats imaginable are as devastating as an asteroid or comet collision. Similarly to the fate of the dinosaurs, large impacts have the ability to bring about mass extinction. To some, an asteroid threat could lead to a global cooperation to save civilization, providing the greatest potential key to peace on Earth.